Volume 12, Regenerative Power Vital Rejuvenation. Epigraph. Every bit of evidence points towards the internal secretions as the holders of the secrets of our inmost being. They are the well springs of life, the dynamos of the organism. Life, body and soul emerge from the activities of the magic ooze of their silent chemistry, precisely as a tree of tin crystals arises from the chemical reactions started in a solution of tin salts by an electric current. Louis Berman, M.D. Part 1, Regeneration. In this book we shall present for your consideration certain facts and principles concerning the conservation and the efficient employment of the life forces or vital force generally known as vitality, or rather of certain of its subtle forms. This instruction proceeds along lines which are not generally recognized by or known to the average individual, although the facts and principles in question were known to the ancient sages, and have been taught and practiced for many centuries by many persons who have had the benefit of this ancient wisdom, which was formerly the exclusive property of the secret schools of esoteric philosophy in Oriental lands and in ancient Greece. This knowledge also was imparted thousands of years ago by the great Hindu sages to their chosen pupils, and formed a part of the occult instruction given to the student of the inner teaching of the Brahmins and Buddhists of that land. There is every reason to believe that a similar teaching was given the neophytes in the occult schools of ancient Persia, Chaldea, and Egypt. References to it are also found in the esoteric writings of the ancient Hebrews. It was taught in the mysteries of the arcane schools of ancient Greece, and was taken over from this source by the Neoplatonists and the Gnostics of the early centuries of the Christian era. It was also a part of the teaching of the Essenes, that strange school of esoteric wisdom which believed to have exerted a strong influence upon the early Christian church. But here, as in many other instances, the knowledge which originally was held to be based upon the existence and activity of certain hidden and secret forces of nature, or perhaps even upon actual supernatural powers, is now known to be but a scientific statement of purely natural cause and effect arising from the power and activity of simple, elemental forces of nature which always have existed and have been operative, but which have been comparatively unknown to the great masses of people. Science has dispelled much of the mystery of the ancient philosophies and religions, but it has served also to corroborate their original facts. Thus, electricity and magnetism, long known to the ancients and ascribed by them to supernatural causes, have been brought under the authority of natural law, and then harnessed and made to work efficiently in the service of man. Likewise, for many centuries the phenomena of mental influence were known to the ancients, and ascribed by them to occult and supernatural causes. Modern science was at first disposed to deny such phenomena, and to regard the whole belief as pure superstition. However, in time their true causes were discovered, and the subjects of hypnotism and mental suggestion is now taught in the highest schools, and is given a place in all of the authoritative textbooks. So it has been, and is, with this phase or form of vital power or life force which constitutes the subject of our present consideration. For many centuries, and in many lands, it formed a part of the esoteric instruction in the secret schools of the occult philosophies, and in the temples of the ancient religions. Its principles of application were discovered, and methods for their employment were evolved. It was taught only to the chosen few, being regarded as a precious secret to be withheld from the masses and to be reserved for the elect. It was believed to be supernatural in origin and nature, and was treated with an almost religious awe and veneration. In fact, in many cases it formed a part of the inner and higher religious teachings of the priesthood, from which the laity were debarred. Later, it formed a part of the secret and occult doctrines which were held and taught by the arcane schools of philosophy in the Middle Ages, traces of which are now found in the rituals of many of the modern secret orders and societies, though their real meaning and spirit has been lost and only the verbal outer covering or shell remains. It was this knowledge which was the real and true underlying reason for the advocacy of celibacy in the priesthoods and holy orders of many religions, including those of the early Christian Church. It was this knowledge which was the animating spirit of the early schools and orders of asceticism, which afterward developed into fanatical phases and forms, the true spirit and meaning of the teaching having been lost. Modern science, true to its customary procedure, for a long time was disposed to regard this ancient teaching as fantastic superstition, ignorance, and supernaturalism, and to deny to it any virtue or validity. However, In time, the physiologists discover the existence and activity of certain principles concerned with the reproductive organism, and with its effect and action upon the entire physical and mental system of the individual. The investigations and observations of the effect of certain glands of the body upon general health and vigor gave new interest to the subject, and certain recent experiments along the lines of gland transplantation have revealed marvelous results. There is every indication that the present century is destined to witness many important discoveries along these particular lines. However, it is not necessary to wait for these anticipated discoveries in order to benefit by what is already known to careful thinkers concerning this subject. While such discoveries may be regarded by some as necessary before the seal of authority of science may be formally placed upon the general principles and facts concerned with the general subject, nevertheless there are thousands of careful investigators and conservative thinkers who feel that sufficient is already known concerning these facts and principles to justify their being accepted as a basis for theory and practice by all persons of average intelligence. Such individuals have long known of these facts and principles, and have had practical demonstrations of their value to mankind when properly and intelligently applied. The essence and spirit of this body of knowledge, principle and mass of facts, is indicated by the term regeneration employed with a special meaning and content. We ask you to consider carefully this term and such special meaning, to the end that you may catch the spirit of the idea and principle embodied in it. As we have sought to impress upon you in other volumes of this series, it is always well to begin with a clear understanding of the principal terms employed in a discussion, argument, or presentation of a proposition or principle to know just what is being considered and discussed. So many terms are employed with so many different shades of meaning, and often with forms of meaning quite opposed to each other, that it is always proper to investigate a term employed in a particular sense, in order to ascertain just what is sought to be indicated by it, and is involved in its content. The term regeneration, of course, is derived from the term generation. The prefix re means again, anew, etc. The term generation means the act, process, or result of generating, and is derived from the verb to generate. The term generate means, to beget, to produce, to engender, to cause to be, to bring into life, to originate, especially by means of a vital or chemical process. It is usually employed in the sense of begetting, reproduction, or procreation, or the production of the young of animal or plant life. Regeneration is defined as, the act of regenerating, or of generating or producing anew and, in a special sense, of giving new life, strength, or vigor to a living being. A person is said to be regenerated physically when by any means or method he acquires new life, new energy, new vigor. The theologians, recognizing the strength of the word, employed it more or less figuratively in the sense of, being born anew in spirit. In such usage the term is frequently employed in theological expression and religious teaching. This theological usage, however, is noted here merely for the purpose of general statement. Our present employment of the term has no reference whatever to such special usage and meaning. In the special meaning of the term regeneration, which has grown around it in the course of thought along the lines of our subject, the giving of new life, strength, or vigor to the individual is literally true, and not merely figurative. By means of such regeneration, the individual is given continued new life, strength, and vigor mental as well as physical. Just as every living thing has been given original life, strength, and vigor by generation, so may it be given new life, strength, and vigor by regeneration. In both generation and regeneration, moreover, the same potent forces of nature are involved and set into activity, i.e., the forces concerned with the sexual or reproductive organism. The secret doctrine, inner teaching, arcane wisdom, etc., of the ancient philosophies and religions, and of the more modern secret societies and schools, concerning the secret of regeneration, is this: nature's generative power may be employed as regenerative power. The same forces which bring man into life, strength, and vigor, will renew and reproduce his life, strength, and vigor, if rightly applied and directed. This is a somewhat startling doctrine when announced for the first time to the average individual. To him it seems contrary to common sense and opposed to common experience. It is only when he begins to understand the basic principles of the idea, and when the misconceptions concerning it have been removed by explanation, that the light begins to dawn upon him. When B has fully grasped the fundamental principles, and the essential reasoning involved in the idea, he tends toward becoming quite enthusiastic concerning it, and to him it seems self-evident. The more he considers it, the more reasonable and certain does it become, and when he learns of the discoveries of modern science concerning it, he passes beyond the point of possible doubt or distrust. Before presenting to you the conclusions of advanced modern scientific thought concerning this subject of regeneration, we shall ask you to undertake a general, brief and cursory consideration of the history of this idea of regeneration as it was conceived by the ancient philosophers and sages. This, not only because of the general interest connected with such consideration, but also that hereafter you may recognize the hidden and cryptic references to regeneration which appear in many of the old mystic, occult and esoteric writings and formulas among those of alchemy as well as those of mysticism. An understanding of this will throw light on many hitherto dark subjects, and will prove the key which will unlock the doors of many old and strange doctrines. In the light of modern knowledge, many of these old presentations of occult knowledge may be read and studied with profit, but without this light, they will ever remain dark subjects to the modern student. The attention of the ancient thinkers was directed from the very first to the mystery of reproduction, the miracle of generation, observing the operations of its laws in plant and animal life, and noting that the essence of life seemed to be concentrated into the tiny seed of the plant or the animal. They soon came to realize that nature here manifested a marvelous power of concentration of the life forces into a small space. Consequently, they regarded such concentrated vital force with a religious awe, and considered it to be supernatural. Further observations concerning the effect of sexual mutilation upon animals and men, and of the changes wrought in mind and body by the quickening of the reproductive power in puberty and adolescence, and by the decrease of such power in old age, led these ancient thinkers to the conclusion that in the generative forces were to be found a highly concentrated essence of life which, if properly controlled and directed, was capable of renewing and continuing the vital strength and vigor of the individual almost indefinitely. In the very ancient yoga philosophy of the Hindus, dating back to long before the Christian era, are found many references to this control and application of this regenerative power, i.e., of the generative power employed for the purpose of increasing and maintaining the mental and physical energy, strength and vigor of the individual, in addition to its more familiar offices and activities. This regenerative power was known as the ojas, and was conceived as of a fiery, ardent, highly concentrated and highly active nature. It was taught that by means of the direction of the ojas along certain physical and psychical channels, not only might the yogi greatly increase his physical strength, energy and vigor, but that he might also thereby cultivate great mental powers and psychic qualities. Swami Vivekananda, the celebrated Hindu teacher who visited Europe and America about 30 years ago, and who taught yoga to Western students for several of years, says of this ojas force in his book entitled Raja Yoga, the yogis claim that of all the energies that the human body comprises, the highest is that what they call ojas. Now this ojas is stored up in the brain, and the more the ojas is in a man's head, the more powerful he is, the more intellectual, the more spiritually strong will that man be. This is the action of ojas. One man may speak beautiful language and beautiful thoughts, but they do not impress people. Another man speaks neither beautiful language nor beautiful thoughts, yet his words charm. That is the power of ojas coming out. Regenerative power, every movement coming from him will be powerful. Now in mankind there is more or less of this ojas stored up, and all the forces that are working in the body, in their highest form, become ojas. You must remember that it is only a question of transformation. The same force which is working outside, as electricity or magnetism, will become changed into inner force. The same forces that are working as muscular energy will be changed into ojas. The yogis say that that part of the human energy which is expressed as sex energy, in sexual functions, sexual thought, and so on, when checked and controlled, easily becomes changed into ojas, and as this lowest center is the one which guides all these functions, therefore the yogi pays particular attention to that center. He tries to take up all this sexual energy and convert it into ojas. It is only the chaste man or woman who can make the ojas rise and become stored in the brain, and that is why chastity has always been considered the highest virtue, because man feels that if he is unchaste, spirituality goes away, he loses mental vigor, and strong moral stamina. That is why in all of the religious orders in the world that have produced spiritual giants you will always find this intense chastity insisted upon. That is why the monks came into existence, giving up marriage. There must be perfect chastity, in thought, word and deed. Without it the practice of Raja Yoga is dangerous, and may lead to insanity. If people practice Raja Yoga and at the same time lead an impure life, how can they expect to become yogis? The above is not merely the personal teaching of Vivekananda, it is his statement of the teaching of the yoga philosophy which was established several thousand years ago long before our present era. Its essential idea is found to permeate many of the modern Hindu philosophies and religions, though in many cases it has become corrupted by the loss of its original spirit, and has developed into fanatical asceticism and a degradation of the idea of sex and reproduction. The original idea of the teaching was that sex is not impure, but that in their proper place and use its activities are proper and normal, but that in its perverted excesses and misuse it becomes an evil. Regeneration is upheld, not because generation is wrong, but because regeneration is an additional field for the expression and manifestation of the concentrated vital force present in the system of man. The ancient Buddhists also held that regeneration was a function and office of the creative powers present in the sexual organism. They held that the will to live, that active principle which is the cause of creation, exists in its most concentrated and potent form in the sexual energy, and that the latter may be employed not only in generation, but also in regeneration. This regeneration, they taught, produces great mental and spiritual strength, energy and vigor, which if directed intelligently will develop even supernormal powers of mind and body in the individual. They held, in some cases, that this creative energy, or will to live, would carry the individual beyond the necessity of physical life in reincarnated forms, and would deliver him from the wheel of life and thereby enable him to reach nirvana. The ancient Egyptians also taught a similar doctrine in the esoteric and secret Isis cult. The creative principle, or life energy, was conceived as feminine. The neophyte was taught that by a conservation of this life energy, and a refusal to expend it in generation, it might be transmuted into vital force which by the process of regeneration would vitalize, animate and vivify the body and mind of the person, and give to him psychical and spiritual powers which are surely superhuman and possibly supernatural as well. This teaching was withheld from the common people, being reserved for the elect. It was held that in certain cases the mortal man might even be transformed into a god by means of the efficient employment of the power of regeneration. The ancient Jews, in their esoteric teachings and doctrines, held to the truth of a similar belief and practice. Constant references to it are found in the Kabbalah, and in other occult Hebrew writings. Some of these ancient writers taught that the story of Adam and Eve is merely an allegorical representation of this principle. This theory held that Adam and Eve represented the male and female human beings as they were originally. These beings were destined to live forever, their creative energy being constantly turned inward in the processes of regeneration. They were tempted by the suggestions of an evil spirit, and thereafter turned their creative energy into the channels of generation and away from those of regeneration, thereby perpetuating the race as a whole but bringing death to its individual members. The Neoplatonists, and the Gnostics, two great schools of mystical philosophy which flourished in the early centuries of the Christian era, taught the doctrine of regeneration in various forms, and many of the members of the early Christian church were influenced by it. These schools obtained their teaching from both Oriental and ancient Greek sources. The ancient Greek mysteries included teaching and practice of regeneration. Gradually, however, the spirit of the teaching was lost, and all that was left was the pitiful husk of perverted asceticism, and a degradation of the sexual ideals. Sex grew to be considered unclean repression, and asceticism became gloried as holy. The influence of this perversion and misapplication of the original teaching and doctrine is felt even unto this day. In the Middle Ages, the alchemists and occult philosophers devoted much attention to the subject of regeneration. Frequent references to it under the figurative term, the elixir of life, are found in old writings of these thinkers. Legends inform us that some of these ancients developed the power and ability to live far beyond the allotted lifetime of man, and retain their full vigor, strength and vital energies to the last. The masses of people thought that the elixir of life was a cordial or tincture of wonderful properties, but those who knew the secret code realized that this potent elixir was naught but the highly concentrated creative energies of man existing in potency and latency in his reproductive organism, the same being transmuted into an inner vitality instead of being dissipated in lustful practices or expended in the functions of generation. In this fundamental idea of regeneration, then, is to be found the true explanation of the universal insistence upon chastity, continence, and often upon celibacy, on the part of the priests and great spiritual leaders, as well as on the part of the great occultists and partakers of the mysteries. This was not, as generally supposed, because of any idea of the essential impurity of sex, but rather because of the belief that the higher powers of man, physical, mental, psychical and spiritual, were increased in power and efficiency by means of the practice of regeneration rather than that of generation, the turning of the creative energy inward, rather than outward. It was the idea of creation on the mental, psychical and spiritual planes, rather than upon the plane of materiality and the physical, that was back of this common custom and rule. But, as we have said, the spirit of the idea was frequently lost in the passage of the years, and only the ugly, lifeless, outer shell remained. Modern science has now discovered certain remarkable facts in the realm of physiology which tend to prove the correctness of the old doctrine of transmutation of sexual energy, or regeneration. More than this, actual surgical experiments have demonstrated that the theory can be made to work out in practice, in the case of animals and of human beings as well. Of course, new theories are being advanced to explain these phenomena, and new names are being coined to apply to them. But the old principle and essential facts remain the same, as true now under the new theories and new names as they were under the old theories and ancient terminology. In our present consideration of this interesting and important subject, we shall take the best to be found in either, in both, the ancient and the modern teachings and knowledge concerning the facts and the principles involved therein. There is an essential and fundamental agreement between them, underlying the differences of theory and interpretation, and despite the character of the different terms employed to indicate the phenomena and the principle of which they are manifestations.